folks, welcome back to My Kitten Reads. I'm Eleanor. Happy New Year. And this is my December 2024 reading wrap up. I should have filmed this a couple of days ago, but I didn't because I'm like that. But you know, it's still Monday, so first Monday of the year, so it's all right. So December, I did, in fact, and this will go in my next video, but I did meet my goal for the year, and in doing so, in December, I read 13 things. So this is what I read, mostly digital. So I read The Good Sister by Christine Coombe, which is an Austen variation, and in this one, it's one where instead of being a Bennet, Lizzie is the youngest Bingley daughter, the third Bingley daughter, who has been living overseas with her aunt, who's as a companion to her aunt, who is married to a general. But her aunt has passed away, so the general sends her back with Colonel Fitzwilliam as escort, so she can live with her brother because she's no longer got proper chaperonage. And she gets along really well with Charles, but things go very dramatic with her other sisters. So that was interesting. Then I read 3 Austen Variations by Lucy Marin. So Her Sisterly Love, in which Elizabeth vows as a young girl, to protect her sisters from her fractious and arguing parents, which changes the way that she interacts with people and the way that people see her once we finally get to the point where, Bingley and Darcy arrive. A Matter of Prudence, in which Mr. Collins is actually nice and was raised practically with the Bennets. He's their cousin, and they're very fond of him, and Mr. Darcy gets jealous of Mr. Collins when he returns from being elsewhere, and sees how he interacts with Lizzie, and then Caroline Bingley lies to Mr. Darcy and tells him that Lizzie was going to marry Mr. Collins, when actually they were talking about a different Bennet sister, although that is really not made clear until much later. It's all ambiguous until later. But yes, and so there's a whole bunch of lies and manipulations for them to work through. Then the third one was The Art of Apology. This is also by Lucy Marin. And in this one, Mr. Bennet, confronts Darcy about his insult to Lizzie. Lizzie starts to receive scorn from her neighbours. Mr. Darcy apologises, but only as a matter of form, not actually properly apologising. So Lizzie rejects his apology until he can learn to apologise properly. Then, to move away from Austen Variations, I completed the short story collection of Wars and Memories and Starlight by Aliette de Bodard. These were, I believe, mostly Zuya Universe stories. That's why I was reading it. There are a couple of stories from her French Fallen Angel universe at the end, which I'm not quite so fond of that universe from memory. I've only read like one or two. I had only read like one story, I think, and hadn't really clicked with it. But there were a whole bunch of short stories about Zuya, or even if they weren't quite Zuya, similar kind of space opera universe. Some of them were precursors to the Zuya universe that were like before mind ships, but still some of the same technology they have. The history of the Zuya universe. So it was a bit confusing. I think there is a list at the back of the anthology as to which tells you which ones are which universe. But it was a little bit confusing reading through it. But plenty of queer characters, plenty of Vietnamese characters, but not just Vietnamese. You see some of the other parts of the Zuya universe where there's sort of stuff based on Mexican culture. You get introduced to the Galactics, who are sort of the European-based culture in the universe, who don't quite get the Viet, or however it is you pronounce it, culture, that kind of thing. Then I read The Citadel of Weeping Pearls by Aliette de Bodard, which is also in the Zoo universe. And this one involves the lost daughter of an emperor who her mother is trying to find her. She disappeared with this citadel she'd built, and trying to find her ends up involving some sort of time travel. Then I listened to the audiobook of The Dress Diary of Mrs. Anne Sykes, Secrets from a Victorian Woman's Wardrobe by Kate Strasden. So this was really fascinating. I went looking for an audiobook, a non-fiction audiobook about embroidery. When I typed in embroidery, I couldn't find anything on like embroidery history. But I found this book about The Dress Diary of Mrs. Anne Sykes, which is, it's not about embroidery, but essentially the author, Kate, was given an album with over 2,000 swatches of fabric neatly captioned from the Victorian era. And in combing through all the captions, she was trying to figure out who this belonged to, who created this, because it was like examples of fabric from this whole era. And types of, literally this was this so-and-so's dress, such and such type of dress, this date. And there was only one caption in the entire album, which was in first person, which told her who actually was writing all these captions, and that was Anne Sykes. And so she was the daughter of a cotton mill owner. She married someone in the cotton trade. She spent time in Singapore. But the author was tracking the history of the textiles and social things and learning all this history about the Victorian era through tracking the different people and the different locations and the different dresses and textiles that were in this album. Which is a fascinating concept, and I really enjoyed listening to that. I listened to a lot of it while I was stitching, and oddly enough, it will come up later, but the teaser chapter for if you've listened to this, liked it, you will like this, that came at the end of that book, was a book about the history of embroidery that I was looking for, that I couldn't find when I actually searched for embroidery. So that was fascinating. Then I read The Tea Master and the Detective by Aliette de Bodard. This is also a novella in the Zoo universe. This was a reread because this is one of the ones that made me fall in love with the Zoo universe. So the Tea Master is a mind ship who has taken to doing tea blends for people, and she's approached by essentially a female Viet version of Sherlock Holmes. Essentially, who wants to go out. She's looking for a blend that will allow her to go into deep space because she doesn't like deep space. She wants to be able to think, and it won't let her think when she's in deep space, because she wants to find a corpse in deep space to analyze how corpses decompose, etc., in deep space. And when they go, they end up going together and finding a corpse that wasn't part of the shipwreck, that was far fresher, and going on to investigate how this woman died. So it's a fun sort of friendshipy, sort of Vietnamese Watson and Holmes in space but women kind of thing, which is fascinating. So that was a reread. Then I read a few more Austen variations. I read Respect and Respectability by Clarissa Joy Thomas. In this one, Mrs. Bennet passes, Mr. Bennet hires a governess, falls in love with the governess, marries the governess, and that, of course, changes the way the girls have been raised, and therefore how they interact with people when Bingley and Darcy turn up. It's kind of one of my favourite types of Austen variation, actually. Of Inheritance and Intrigue by J. George, where Lizzie has an inheritance. I can't off the top of my head remember where the inheritance came from, maybe an aunt. But essentially she gets told by Mr. Phillips and Mr. Bennet on her 18th birthday that she has this inheritance including the fact that she owns, I think she owns Netherfield Park. But she keeps it secret from everybody because she doesn't want fortune hunters coming after her. And so that changes the way she interacts with the Bingley party. Then a new Shanna Grandison one came out in the Take Charge series, and that was Thomas Bennet Takes Charge. And in this one, Thomas Bennet has a younger brother who gets jealous when Fanny Gardner falls in love with his older brother, and chooses him instead of the younger brother. And so he leaves on their wedding day and goes to the New World, to America. Why am I looking at my complete works of Shakespeare and not the camera? I don't know, but brain. And in this one, there's also extra inheritance involving Netherfield Park, and eventually, on hearing from Mr. Collins, who thinks he's the heir to Longbourn, which of course, actually, Thomas Bennet's younger brother is actually, the heir. Thomas Bennet takes charge, writes to his brother, tells him, I need your help, I need you to come back. His brother, having gotten married, had children, lost his wife, now regrets the way he left, starts the journey back to England with his kids. All the time the usual villains are lurking. Then I read, and this was the only physical book I read all month, and believe me, I need to get better at reading physical books. Sweet and Bitter Magic by Adrienne Tooley. So this is one of my Outbreak books. This is YA. It is fairly sweet. It's a queer sort of girl, lesbian, sapphic romance, but also fantasy. So we have one character who is a witch and a very power witch, but she was banished from within where all the witches live, because she tried to use dark magic to save her sister, and she's now being haunted by her sister's diary. And then our other character lives in the village and is what's called a source, meaning she is basically full of magic, but she can't use it, but other witches can. She's supposed to have gone within, but she didn't, because she hid the fact that she's a source because her older brother was killed by the previous year of dark magic, after which all the magic use got regimented. And she's trying to look after her father, who's just a depressed mess. And then this new dark magic plague turns up, and starts affecting her father. And so she goes to the witch and she says, I will help you defeat this. I'm a source. I will help you defeat this darkness, and you can help me save my father. And they don't particularly like each other, of course, and there are secrets. And there's a bit of a twist about what's actually causing the dark magic, but it's a sort of alongside all this is sort of a sweet developing romance that doesn't go very far by the time you get to the end, but they've admitted that actually they're very fond of each other, so it's quite sweet, but I enjoyed it, so that's good. I always like an Outbreak book that I've enjoyed. So I read that. Then, the final thing that I finished, so I finished that on New Year's Eve, and also finished on New Year's Eve was Threads of Life, A History of the World Through the Eye of a Needle by Claire Hunter. So this I also listened to entirely on audio when I was in Tasmania. This is the one that I got the taster of at the end of the previous audiobook, and essentially is various themes of history and how needlework and sewing has recorded history, has affected history, has remembered history, in all sorts of topics. So for example, it starts, of course, with possibly the most famous piece of embroidery in history, the Bayeux Tapestry, which is not actually a tapestry. I already knew this, not actually a tapestry, actually embroidery. So it starts with that, but then it goes through topics like imprisonment, and so not only imprisonment in prisons, and programs. She talks about like programs that were put into place to like get inmates to do patchwork, but also things like the famous Changi quilts, in which women made these quilts and embroidered their names on it so that they would be remembered, and so that their menfolk in the separate part of the Changi prison in Singapore, in order to would know that they were still there, and stuff like that. And then it was as stuff like use of in protest, like the suffragette banners, or like there was one that I found absolutely fascinating, which was this nuclear disarmament ribbon, which was actually, the idea was to mark the anniversary of the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima, by tying a ribbon all around the White House, made up of these panels that had been sewn by thousands and thousands of people, and ended up, because they had very limited time into which the police agreed they could do it, so an individual person had to hold an individual panel, and then for about, I think like for 5 minutes, they were allowed to tie them all together into a ribbon around the White House, and it ended up going right down the road. It was like miles long. And it didn't achieve anything great politically. It wasn't really a protest. The idea behind it was just to make people think about the concept of nuclear weapons and the damage that they do, and to remember the damage that was done by making this massive, massive ribbon. So that was fascinating. There were all sorts of other stuff about different ways in which embroidery and needlework has been so important in history, and sewing and patchwork and quilts and all of that stuff. So that was really fascinating. And so I did a lot of stitching while listening to this while I was in Tassie, and finished it at about 9:30 on New Year's Eve. And that was the last thing that I read in December. So those are the 13 things I read in December. Still, to be honest, far too many awesome variations, and these are just the new ones. I'm a bit too obsessed. I need to get used to reading physical books again and read the books that are on my shelf, and the stuff that is like not just awesome variations, which is why this Zia Universe project's been quite good, because they're not physical, but they're not awesome variations. Anyway, I'm starting to get a bit croaky. So that is what I read in December in 2024. Always happy to discuss any of these books in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you all again really soon. Bye.